taking on America's allies and trade partners and taking down the global economic order.
We have no choice. This should have been done many years ago. We have no choice.
As President Trump pushes his America First agenda in an escalating trade war, the European Union and China retaliate. And while many members of the president's own party criticize his latest move, we speak to a leading Trump supporter in the U.S. Congress.
He says he wants agreements that are in the best interest of the United States. I think that's what the citizens expect from their president. And we support the goals, and the president's been clear. He's against tariffs.
Hello, I'm Ghida Fakhry. Welcome to the program as we examine the latest fallout from President Trump's decision to impose unprecedented tariffs on some of the U.S.'s key allies and China in what has already become an escalating war of words. For his supporters, he has delivered on yet another campaign promise. But what will this latest move mean for the existing global order and the fraying Western alliance? Over the next hour, we look at the impact on the global economy and the ripple effect of Trump's trade war. Hello from Washington, where the White House is bracing for more retaliatory measures from its key allies and trade partners. His protectionist policies have targeted Canada, Mexico, the EU, and now China, causing heightened tensions. The U.S.'s two neighbors were quick to announce countermeasures in response to Trump's decision to impose tariffs on steel and aluminum. Now the EU is set to impose its own, so is China. On this program, we examine the motives behind Trump's unilateral moves and the consequences for the rest of the world. But first, a look at how President Trump's policies are raising the stakes in a large-scale battle between America and its partners, and why it is splitting the Western alliance.
The United States has been ripped off for many, many years by its bad trade deals. We're going to be instituting tariffs.
Let me be clear. These tariffs are totally unacceptable.
如果美方出台包括加征关税在内的贸易制裁措施，双方谈判达成的
China has been taking out $500 billion a year out of our country and rebuilding China.
Wir glauben, dass die jetzt in Aussicht gestellten Zölle durch die Vereinigten Staaten von Amerika diesen Grundsätzen der WTO widersprechen.
Our companies have moved out and moved to Mexico and other countries, including Canada. Now, we are going to fix that situation. And if it's not fixed, we're not going to deal with these countries.
As Canadians, we're polite, we're reasonable, but we also will not be pushed around.
Yeah, we're like the piggy bank that everybody's robbing, and that ends.
Je sais que on ne gouverne jamais solidement, on ne préside jamais solidement quand on n'est pas cohérent avec soi-même.
We express deep disappointment at the unjustified decision of the United States to apply tariffs to steel and aluminium imports.
Und wollen aber diese Probleme womöglich durch Gespräche verändern oder lösen.
Trump's trade policies aren't just creating a rift with America's traditional allies and trade partners. They're also causing divisions within the president's own political party. The Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan, condemned the president's tariff hikes, saying, quote, he disagrees with this decision. Instead of addressing the real problems in the international trade of these products, this action targets America's allies when we should be working with them to address the unfair trading practices of countries like China. There are better ways, he says, to help American workers and consumers. The chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Bob Corker, had this to say.
Look, we're in a strange place. I mean, it's almost it's becoming a cultish thing, isn't it? It's not a good place for any party to end up with a cult-like situation as it relates to a president that happens to be purportedly of the same party. One of our central elements is fair but free trade, and to have a you know, an administration that wakes up every day on an ad hoc basis just making stuff up as they go along with no coherency to it.
Many Republicans in Congress, though, support the president's trade decisions. Earlier, I spoke with U.S. Congressman Jim Jordan. He is a top leader within the conservative faction of the Republican Party. He's also one of President Trump's staunchest allies. I asked him if he agrees with the president's actions on trade.
I would back up and say this, that in the president's first year and a half, I think it's been an amazing 18 months. I mean, taxes are lower, the economy is growing, unemployment's at its lowest it's been in 20 years.
But so why create this trade war then? Why take on the U.S.'s key allies? Can you afford to alienate the EU, Canada, Mexico, even China?
Yeah, the president was clear throughout the campaign that this is important to him, getting better trade agreements that benefit the United States, and he's trying to do that. Now, are there concerns? I was one of the individuals, members of Congress, who signed the letter to the president back in the spring when the first tariffs went on steel and aluminum, expressing concern and saying, let's make sure we focus on who I think the biggest offender in this whole area is, and that's China. Let's take a targeted approach there.
But does it make much economic sense? Because just looking at your state of Ohio, known as the nation's industrial capital, a major steel, aerospace, auto producer, not to mention a major agricultural state as well. 40% of your soybeans go to China. Can you lose that export market?
You know, Ohio, the 4th District of Ohio, which I get the privilege of representing, is of the 435 congressional districts. We're one of the top manufacturing districts. Got a great company, Honda of America, headquartered in our district. And as you point out, we're also sort of the start, the kind of the serious start of the corn and soybean agriculture belt as it moves across the Midwest. So
can you lose these export markets?
We're typical Ohio, where we make and grow things. Of course we can't. But I've talked with people in agriculture. I've talked with manufacturers. I got a friend who's in the feed business for livestock operations, and they're all concerned, but they're also all willing to let the president, give the president some latitude to negotiate better deals, because they're tired of this practice that has existed for so long, where trade deals didn't necessarily benefit the United States in the way that they should. So while I'm for free trade, I think, and while our district is, I think many of those folks are willing to give the president a little flexibility to get a better deal.
Sure, I mean, but the question is, can you afford to upset a country like China, which holds $1.2 trillion in U.S. debt?
I think the president's goal that he set at the G7 to get rid of all tariffs is a worthy goal. A better NAFTA agreement, the president's been clear on, is one of his goals. So we got to give it some time. Do I have concerns? Yes. I think everyone does. But we're also willing to allow this president to have some flexibility to negotiate. And I think the American people support that, as evidenced by the president's approval ratings and, frankly, the success we are now seeing in some foreign policy areas. Maybe this whole area also ties into the fact that North Korea was willing to come negotiate. Maybe China's had an impact on North Korea as a result of some of this. All this begins to tie together, and I'll leave it as I said, some latitude and flexibility with the White House.
So you're willing to give him some latitude. So are, as you say, some Americans. But
I think a lot of
Americans. Must be worried, though, aren't you, for your state, Ohio, as we said, a major industrial state, also a big agricultural state as well. When it comes to retaliation, all of these countries that have been targeted have already hinted.
We're definitely concerned.
Congressman,
that's fair, because
but they've hinted.
I've talked to some manufacturers.
Allow me to just say that a lot of these countries have already hinted that they will be imposing tariffs on states' key industries. Yeah. Not just to target Trump's base, but actually to target Republicans in the forthcoming election.
There were tariffs on American goods already in place before any of this started in the spring, and the president wants to deal with that as well.
That could hurt you in the elections, though, can't it? If you lose jobs in key states like Ohio, and Ohio stands to lose 15,000 jobs, and the list goes on.
Here's the facts right now: lowest unemployment in 20 years, strong economic growth, people's taxes are cut. The American people like what they're seeing from this new administration. And so that's why I think it's important to allow some time, some flexibility. The American people are open to allowing their president, who they elected, who's had a great first year and a half, to do some negotiating. But yeah, let's hope that we get some resolution as quickly as possible, because like I said, I've heard from the manufacturers in our district, and I know they're real concerns. And I'm a free trader. Yeah. I'm for trade, because trade means free trade means the ability to sell your products in new markets. we want that. There are jobs in Ohio because we can sell product all over the world. But we would like, when we send that product, not to have tariffs imposed on it, which are currently in place. We'd like to have that those tariffs reduced, just like the president said.
But with states retaliating, that won't be the case. Whatever spin Trump puts on this, I mean, you and I both know that this will kill a lot of jobs for Americans, won't it? I mean, a recent study has shown that while 25,000 jobs might be created in the steel industry, close to 500,000 could be lost elsewhere. Could you afford to take this risk?
We don't know that it's going to happen, but and I would disagree with that conclusion. But you're right. We got a lot more folks in West Central and North Central Ohio who are in the steel and aluminum using business, not in the steel and aluminum producing business. But all those industries are important. The president understands that. I just hope we get to a resolution sooner rather than later.
What should Congress do? Because many of your Republican colleagues have actually suggested that the Trump administration's authority on this should be reined in, that Congress, as a equal branch of government, should really assert its authority on this, because they say Trump is pursuing his own protectionist agenda that's hurting your relationship with allies.
Well, I don't necessarily agree with that, but I do think that the Constitution is clear. Taxing policy, trade policy, tariff policy. We have separate and equal branches of government, and we should not abdicate our responsibility. But there's a way to work with the White House to do that, and I'm in favor of looking at those options and possibilities as we move forward.
Your trade partners and allies are seizing the WTO to try to handle this dispute. Now, without prejudging the outcome of arbitration, should you be worried? That's always a concern. I think that's the president's underlying concern and why he's embarked on the path he has. Again, I think it's critical that we see how this play out, and I'm hoping for a resolution sooner rather than later. Do you think, though, it might have been wise for the Trump administration to go to the WTO if it had major issues with trade partners like China because of its unfair trade practices? I think direct negotiation with talking with these countries is important, and the president has said so. He said he wants a different and better NAFTA agreement. He says he wants agreements that are in the best interest of the United States. I think that's what the citizens expect from their president. And we support the goals, and the president's been clear. He's against tariffs. But many consider his behavior erratic, though. Would you agree? I think the president has had an amazing year and a half. Think about all the promises he made out of the Iran deal. The Koreas have met, the hostages have come home, the embassy's in Jerusalem, the Gorsuch is on the court, the taxes have been cut, the economy is growing, unemployment's at its lowest, and I'm forgetting some things. So by anyone's definition, even the mainstream liberal press in this country, by anyone's definition, that is an amazing year and a half. And I think the American people understand that, and I think that's why they're willing to let the president have a little latitude here to negotiate better deals for the citizens of this great country. You don't think this will affect negatively the chances of Republicans in the midterm elections? I think we're going to win. Now, it's always tough in first midterm. Everyone knows the history of American politics. So will it be easy? No, but anything worth doing, anything worth accomplishing is never easy. It always takes work and effort, and that's the way, that's just the way God made it. So we'll see, but I feel pretty confident we can keep the majority. So how will all this play out for the U.S. on the global stage? Let's discuss with our guests. Peter Morrissey is a former chief economist at the U.S. International Trade Commission, and Pinar Sebi-Wilbur is the chief economist for the American Council for Capital Formation. Pinar Wilbur, the EU Trade Commissioner, wasn't mincing her words when she called the U.S. tariffs a dangerous game. Trump believes the trade wars are easy. They're easy to win. But he is up against some serious economic heavyweights like China, isn't he? How exactly does this end?
So if you're looking at U.S. trade policy, if we keep the tariffs at unilateral level, which means U.S. acts and other countries behaves as usual, and they don't act and they don't respond, probably that's not going to create a much harm for United States. I don't think so.
But they said they would.
Okay, so that's the point. If everyone starts acting up and if everyone starts throwing in tariffs, then the equation will change.
And we're not just talking about throwing in tariffs, we're talking about surgical retaliation. Many have hinted, have even announced that the trade tariffs that they'll put in place will hit some of these Republican states that will really hurt Trump's base.
Well, yeah, it would. What we're really talking about here is economic sanctions to change behavior. And the lessons of history are that if you're going to apply an economic sanction, which is what the United States is doing to China, then it has to be fairly complete. You have to have your allies involved with you. For example, sanctions were effective with Iran and South Africa, but not in other circumstances.
But hold on, these are not sanctions. These are tariffs that you're employing against your trade partners.
I'll put the words that I want on it.
No, but these are not sanctions, to be clear.
No, they're not sanctions in your mind, but they are working the way sanctions do. You're cutting off trade. They're talking about changing investment rules for Chinese firms and things like this. They are actions designed to cause economic discomfort.
But discomfort to whom in the long term?
You seem to want to answer the question for me.
I'm asking you the question. Discomfort to whom?
The objective of the administration is to cause economic discomfort for China so that it'll change its behavior. And what I'm saying is that we know from the history of economic sanctions, which is the closest analog we have. I mean, you say, oh, a trade war this, a trade war that. What history do we have of trade wars? We don't have a history of trade wars.
Well, there is a history of trade wars. I mean, Trump is not the first American president to spark a trade war with his European and other allies, is he? I mean, Herbert Hoover did it back in the 1930s. Nixon did it. Reagan did it. Why is Trump doing it?
You really have a very peculiar view of history.
No, but this is the fact, isn't it?
No, it's not a fact.
It's not a fact.
But the point is that what we know about this is that unless you have your allies in line so that you can bring a lot of pressure and the country that your target can't find a way around it, it is very difficult to prevail.
But are they bringing their allies on the table to fight? That's the problem. Especially in a world economy that's so integrated, it's hard to separate the lines. And I think what the Trump administration was doing wrong is opening too many fires on different fronts. Yeah. And I don't think that that's going to help their case. Let's look at China. China is a global problem, which needs a global solution. By offending your allies, Canadians, Mexicans, European Unions, before going into that war is not going to help you.
But when Trump says this is not a level playing field, something needs to be done, does he have a point, though? Is the tactic that he is employing the wrong one?
The problem is right. We have a problem with China. I mean, no one is denying that. I think the tactics are wrong. I will not proceed with the tariffs. Probably, you know, the U.S. led the organization of WTO, the dispute settlement. I think they could have worked with that process and improve it if that was our heartburn. But the way that they're attacking the problem is not a solution.
Why not work with the allies, Peter Morrissey?
Well, I think he would like to work with the allies, but he's gone ahead and started another fight with them about aluminum and steel. That makes it very difficult to do. That's the first thing. But even if you took aluminum and steel away, there's a couple of overlays here. One is that several of the ally leaders are confusing their responsibilities as heads of government with their personal views of Donald Trump as a person. And I think that is a mistake. For example, it's very difficult to cooperate with Britain right now because Theresa May curls her lip every time she sees him. So that's the first problem. The second is the Europeans would say to us, well, if it's steel and excess capacity, let's have negotiations. We've been doing that for 20 years. If you want to talk about technology and so forth, let's go to the WTO. Well, we know that's failed. The methods that they would prescribe to accomplish change are not there. That's one those two things. And there's a third thing. Within the European Union, many of the things that China does to all its trading partners globally, Germany does to its southern neighbors by insisting on running a trade surplus and running the kind of trade regime that it does. So how do you get Angela Merkel, who doesn't personalize the relationship very much, on board when you're asking her to be at odds with China in a way that contradicts her?
But is he making a major miscalculation by pushing these European countries around? The EU as a bloc is the largest trading partner with the United States, and they are now pursuing their own trade deals with Asia, with Japan, with China. So they do have quite a bit of leverage these days, don't they? I mean, are they likely to back down?
I think at the beginning there was a chance of negotiation because I think there was a division between Germany and France. I think Germans were more willing to come to table to strike a deal, but French were a little hesitant. But after the latest G7 meeting, and when the personal insults started flying, I think that kind of went down. The reason I am worried is this way of negotiating is also strengthening the hand of the other leaders because they have a political base to respond at home. Who wants a weak leader? I mean, Prime Minister Trudeau has to respond to his political base. And then, probably your trade negotiators are doing a great job behind the closed doors, but then your president or his senior advisor comes out and insults.
He is berating these leaders in personal terms, like the Prime Minister of Canada calling him weak and dishonest. Is this a wise negotiating tactic? Is it a tactic to force the hand of Canadians and Mexicans with the negotiations going on with NAFTA? Or is it something else, a policy shift?
It's not a policy shift. I wrote a piece the day after the G7 breakup, in which I said was Trump brought the correct message to the G7 about what the Americans want to accomplish, but all the children need to behave better. Trump has been baited by some of these leaders. Unfortunately, he's risen to the bait, but I think it is an unfair characterization to place the blame for bad behavior entirely on Trump's shoulders. Theresa May, for example, behaves as if she can treat him badly because of his history. I don't find his history very acceptable, but the reality is he's President of the United States, just as I'm a guest here, and we should be treated appropriately.
But some would say the same about the Prime Minister of Canada and others as well.
Hold on. Trump left the room willing to sign that statement. He gets on an airplane, and then Trudeau starts prancing like a peacock to the Canadian electorate, saying, I won't take any nonsense from him. That baited Trump. That was a time to keep his mouth shut. They had the guy willing to sign something. They should have left it alone.
Should they have left it alone? I mean, Canada was called a national security threat. Shouldn't they have reacted slightly, a little bit?
I think it's the dairy that's the national security. I don't know, the information that's coming out, I haven't heard Prime Minister Trudeau behaving like a peacock. In fact, some of the journalists who were in the room said that he was actually trying to be very level-headed when he was trying to explain how he wanted to work with U.S.
It's reached the level where the chemistry is so poor that it's going to take some time for things to decompress. The real problem here is that some of them have histories which make it difficult for that to happen. Trump, Merkel, and May in particular.
But now you take on China as well, and doesn't the United States, when you look at the wider picture, the negotiating, the deal-making, the peacemaking in the Korean Peninsula, doesn't China play an important role, and doesn't Trump need China for his North Korea negotiations?
I have argued that we don't need China at all for the North Korean negotiations. It really comes down to a very simple situation there. Either we have a military option and we're prepared to use it, therefore North Korea has to deal, and in turn North Korea really wants to embrace the West, and given their economic circumstances they'd be smart to do it because China hasn't made their life very easy, or not. I don't think that we can count on the Chinese to be honest, forthright, deliver on promises, and so forth. So my feeling is that China is not that much a factor unless it wants to intervene in some way. And I don't think it really wants to do that.
Pinar, to you finally, China is not that much of a factor. Do you agree? Because this trade war seems like it is also pushing old enemies closer together. We saw the Chinese and the Indians come together. Their GDP in a couple of decades will apparently surpass that of the G7 countries. Iran seems to be turning to Russia and China as well for trade and security. Mexico turning to Latin America. So, I mean, there are alternatives, aren't there?
There are alternatives, and don't forget, China has a population of 1.3 billion. That's a huge market. When, as an economist, you think long-term, and having China part of the negotiation is an important factor. It's a big market, so yes, I think China will be a big player, and given their policies, you're expecting them to be a big player in certain countries, in certain locations, certain regions. Maybe today they might not be a big factor when you put them vis-a-vis to United States, but they are growing and they are moving to a certain target.
And who stands to lose more, the US or China in this trade war, with China having this trade surplus?
Yeah, but don't forget, when you look at the trade surplus with United States, not all the value that's coming from China is a Chinese production. There are actually allies who are sending their products in there. When you're tracking an iPhone, maybe out of that, I don't know, 300 billion, 200 billion belongs to China. So
it doesn't show the full picture.
No, it's not. It doesn't show the full picture.
No winners, or do we have winners in this trade war? Very briefly.
I don't believe that we're going to have a winner in this trade war. I think it will end. I think the Chinese will make some kind of concession that won't give Americans what they like. But in projecting forward, it's very easy to say, for example, that China and India will have a GDP larger than Europe, whatever. The Europeans are going to become a diminished player over the next quarter century because they cannot solve their internal problems. And the arrangement of alliances is going to look very different 20 years from now than today. If I dare forecast, the American alliance with other countries in the Pacific and with Britain is going to be very much more important than NATO is now.
Well, that's true. I think that was the reason of the change of heart of President Trump when he started talking about Trans-Pacific Partnership, because he saw that how important that was actually.
And he walked away from it. All right, well, on this note, let me thank you both, Pinar Wilbur and Peter Morrissey. Thank you very much indeed. Still ahead, we visit a factory in Pennsylvania and hear from steel workers.
I think in general, our trade laws are pretty weak in this country.
And we ask a former Trump trade advisor about the politics driving the president's agenda. President Trump delivered on a campaign promise to withdraw from a major trade agreement and renegotiate others, citing what he called bad deals for American companies and their workers. So how does Trump's latest intervention affect the steel industry and his campaign promise to create millions of jobs? We traveled to the town of Conshohocken to get the view from Pennsylvania's steelworkers.
Please, come on up.
My name is Ron Davis. I strongly support tariffs. It definitely helps the steel industry in the United States.
Tremendously, I support it. I support the decision to put tariffs on.
Trump's just being a businessman, and that's really what he's doing. There's really no need to put tariffs on Canada. Mexico's a different story. The trade deficit with Mexico is much different than Canada. We have a pretty good, strong trade balance with Canada.
China can actually make more steel in 1 month than the U.S. can actually produce in 1 year. So, you know, that's kind of unheard of. You know, that's you know, it's very phenomenal is what I put it. So, you know, I support the trade, I support fair trade.
Imports come in, subsidized, illegally dumped, so they're selling below market cost, below market share. So this way we can balance it by the cost, reduces the cost for us to be able to sell steel in our country.
Trade makes the world go round. I mean, you have to be able to trade, but it has to be fair trade. In this case, it wasn't fair trade. It was what we call cheating.
Our concern now, and even why they filed this Section 232, is if a major conflict breaks out again, I'm not sure that the U.S. steel industry could produce the steel that needs to be made, especially once they are our plant. In general, our trade laws are pretty weak in this country. Imports aren't necessarily bad, but illegal imports, when they're being subsidized by foreign governments, it's illegal. I mean, that's why we have a trade case. That's why President Trump put the tariffs in, because Wilbur Ross, the Secretary of Commerce and the International Trade Commission, they heard cases and they ruled in our favor. That's why there's being tariffs put on.
As you see now, or if you want to research, steel is going back up again.
It just really frustrates us when you go and talk to politicians, and I don't think they understand that you're putting your national security. Steel is the backbone of a country. When you talk industrial, the industrial age is based on steel and oil. And you're now losing all these steel mills. So at some point, you will become reliant on foreign entities to produce your steel for your military. The bridge they built in California, that they use Chinese steel, and they had to tear 35% because not only is it cheaper, it's not the same quality. So.
And here you have it, you have job creation. So with us booming and making steel, you have, you know, the construction industry booming. You have other outside contractors booming, job creation. It's a trickle-down effect, a domino effect.
And you hear people out there saying free trade at any cost is good for this country, and it's truly not.
Here to discuss the president's trade agenda is Curtis Ellis, a former trade advisor to Donald Trump's election campaign and a senior policy advisor at America First Policies. Curtis Ellis, you have been saying that the U.S., it is about time that it got a president like Donald Trump, willing to confront reality and willing to confront China. You call it leadership, many people call it reckless.
Well, for 30 years at least, China has been systematically violating every agreement it signed on to when it joined the World Trade Organization, every norm and standard practice of behavior for international trade.
But if that is the case, why not take your case to the World Trade Organization? China's a member, as you say, the US is a member, so is the EU. Their logic and complaint. Why not do that instead of imposing unilateral action?
Well, the World Trade Organization has proven itself incapable of dealing with serial violators like China. Complaints have been lodged, the talk goes on. We have very nice, well-meaning bureaucrats in Geneva, but they really don't know how to really do something when it comes to a serial violator.
But the truth is the US hasn't tried that route, has it? I mean, it sounds like the US is simply crying foul now because China seems to be beating it at its own game. I mean, wasn't the US taking advantage of the system for so many decades in virtually every corner of the world?
No.
How is this different?
Well, China has government-owned enterprises. It subsidizes its various industries with government subsidies. It provides cheap energy, no-interest loans. It takes land from peasants and then builds a factory and says to people like Foxconn or Apple Computers, make your phones here. We'll give you a factory. I don't see anybody else doing that. The United States doesn't do that. We respect property rights and we respect human rights.
Capitalism and the free
That
market
is not
economy.
capitalism, that's theft. Taking property from someone, that's not capitalism, that's theft.
If you have an issue like this, isn't the best arbitration mechanism at the WTO?
And this is the normal way countries protect their own national interest, is by promoting industrial development at home.
Precisely.
They don't rely
But
on
precisely.
international bureaucrats
But
to do that.
precisely, this is what all countries are doing, including Canada, which is being accused of all sorts of things but by President Trump, who...
No, it's Justin Trudeau who is accusing President Trump of doing
Well,
exactly
Justin Trudeau,
what the Canadian government
but
does,
isn't
which
he
is
also
protecting
protecting-
industries that it deems important.
But isn't he also protecting his own industries and his own workers?
And he should, and the United States should do the same.
But without talking about any specific country, I mean, when you look at this trade war, you say it's a good thing, that this is a war that's easily winnable. How exactly can it be when you've heard all of the different trading blocs and partners of the US saying they're ready to retaliate? How exactly do you win a war like this?
Well, I understand why other countries would be upset that we're not willing to give them a free lunch anymore. I mean, American policy since the end of World War II has been to open up our domestic market and provide access for other countries to sell into our market, even if they won't open up their market for us to sell into their market. We wanted to build up middle-class countries around the world. We've been wildly successful at that for 70 years. We've promoted stable middle-class societies around the world, but what's happened in the process is we've destabilized our own middle class, and now it's time to rebalance.
But aren't you making the problem even worse because you're going to increase all consumer prices, manufacturing jobs? There's also artificial intelligence.
Manufacturing is already starting to come back.
There's also artificial intelligence, which many people would argue takes away some 70% of jobs worldwide, not just in the US. How do you stop that?
Manufacturing is already starting to come back, and then the question is, who's going to make the artificial intelligence? Who's going to make the robots? We want them made here. China understands that. That's why they have put artificial intelligence and robotics on their list of national champions industries that they're promoting through the Made in China 2025 plan. They're giving favorable treatment to those industries to develop those industries.
But your
if
companies
China
have
can do
factories
that,
there
we can do that too.
Apple and others have factories there too. So aren't you hurting your own industry?
Because China is giving them factories, stealing land from peasants to build factories that they then give, because China is forcing American companies to take on Chinese partners and transfer technology as a price of doing business. And we're saying, no, that's not good.
So is
Enough
this all
already.
about stopping China from continuing its global economic rise? Because this surely isn't about jobs or about trade, is it? It's about politics.
This is about a level playing field and respecting property rights and respecting intellectual property so that we don't become colonies of China, where they are the workshop of the world and the rest of the world is simply supplying raw materials to China's economic industrial engine.
But isn't it also important for the US to respect its own allies? Not only did President Trump call Canada a national security threat, he called Prime Minister Trudeau weak and dishonest. Is that the way for the US to deal with its second largest trade partner?
Well, he did not call Canada a national security threat. He said what we need is to have a domestic steel and aluminum industry for our national security.
But he justified it on national security grounds.
Absolutely, under the Trade Act of 1962. This is well-known fact that things like the automobile industry, the steel industry are absolutely essential to the national security of the United States. We cannot be dependent on foreign sources for our strategic metals.
But does this make any sense?
It makes absolutely clear sense. Every country wants to have an automobile industry because the know-how that goes into making an automobile supports the defense industries.
So the US, it looks like, will be taking on many more allies and trade partners. Curtis Ellis, Senior Policy Advisor at America First Policies, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
So as we've been saying, President Trump has called existing trade agreements as a, quote, bad deal for Americans. He vowed to renegotiate new ones to benefit American companies and workers. But will the self-proclaimed world's best negotiator ultimately emerge with an even worse deal for Americans? Heba Abdallah has our 5 facts.
President Trump's trade tariffs directly impact more than 65% of the world's economy. The U.S. alone makes up 25%, with the EU representing 22% of global GDP. China's share of the global economy stands at almost 15%. Trump is also taking on his North American neighbors, Canada and Mexico, amounting to 3.6%. U.S. tariffs on China could have a devastating impact on Singapore, South Korea, and Hong Kong. They are heavily invested in China's manufacturing supply chain, so any changes in Chinese production would have a domino effect. Allies are challenging the U.S. at the World Trade Organization. The WTO serves as an international arbiter in trade disputes and will decide whether punitive measures are warranted. But it could take years before they issue a final ruling. And in this case, the EU, Canada, and Mexico are moving ahead with their own form of trade justice and plan to impose retaliatory tariffs on the U.S. A trade war has some winners. The exact outcome is uncertain to economists, but some predict the winners could be America's top competitors. Brazilian farmers could seek an edge over U.S. growers, and European companies may take over Chinese orders with American aircraft manufacturers. But analysts say there are many more losers than winners in a trade war. China tariffs on U.S. imports would be a blow to American farmers, as well as their own. Trump's tariffs targeting tech products that are made in China could hurt major American companies with factories there, but ultimately increased costs will be passed on to consumers. And to remain profitable, companies will likely cut jobs. The total net job loss is expected to reach more than 400,000.
So let's put some of these facts to our guests. Jeff Fakhry is a research director for the Coalition for a Prosperous America, and Laura Bowman is president of Trade Partnership Worldwide, a firm that looks at the impact of trade policies. Laura Bowman, to you first. Your organization came up with some of these startling figures that we just looked at, hundreds of thousands of net job losses in the US as a result of these tariffs and the retaliatory measures that are expected. How does that square up with President Trump's promise to bring back millions of jobs to American workers?
Well, it doesn't square up in my view. It's a net negative loss to the U.S. economy in terms of jobs. So while there might be some job gains in the steel industry, there are more than that number lost in other sectors of the economy, including manufacturing. Net negative loss of almost 20,000 jobs in manufacturing. 16 jobs lost for every one gained. So I don't see the math working for the president.
So why then take this risk if it won't keep his base happy in the long term?
That's a very good question. I don't know the answer to that.
Jeff Fakhry, imposing tariffs on some of these countries, will they, do you think, not only kill a lot of American jobs, but also put the burden and increase the cost for American consumers and manufacturers?
No, I don't think any of that is true. I think there's two things to look at. First, don't forget these are tariffs levied under a national security clause of our laws. And we are in a dangerous situation with regard to steel and aluminum, where we cannot produce enough steel and aluminum to supply either our civilian industry nor our military industry. And
so you take on your allies?
No, we don't take on our allies. We are friends with our allies, but we are the #1 military power in the world. We need to be able to field an army. We need to be able to provide the steel and aluminum domestically that we need. And there's also a larger issue here. Don't forget, the reason why the U.S. has become a net importer of steel, and the reason why we have closed more than 40 of our 53 aluminum smelting plants, is because the Chinese have gone on a wanton tear, investing in steel and aluminum billions and billions of dollars and building up their capacity to the point where today they provide more than half of the world's steel and aluminum.
All right, well, Laura Bowman, Jeff Fakhry brings up the national security dimension. Steel obviously is used in every aspect of the military, but won't there be long-term implications for the Pentagon with potentially higher costs?
There will, and even before we get to those higher costs, there's two things to note. One is the aluminum industry itself is opposed to the imposition of the tariffs. They've put out memos to that effect saying, please don't do this. The Secretary Mattis included a memo in the Section 232 report that, that Secretary Ross submitted to the president, saying that while they technically supported the tariffs, the Defense Department had all the steel that it really needed from the U.S. industry. It was the 3% that it currently purchases from U.S. steel producers is all that it needs.
And it will also trigger retaliation against U.S. defense companies.
Yes, those products are on the list.
How do you look at this issue?
I think it's important to look more carefully at who supports and who does not support the steel tariffs. I mean, Laura's absolutely right that there are multinational corporations that oppose these tariffs, and there are free trade Republicans that oppose these tariffs, and there are financial community members who oppose these tariffs, and other politicians. However,
so how are these good news from a national security perspective?
From a national security perspective, we need to be self-sufficient in steel and aluminum. We cannot rely on imported steel and aluminum. That's point number one. Point number two is China has increased production year after year. Their goal, from what we can make out of it, is to achieve a dominating position in the entire world and leave countries like the US and our European partners dependent on import.
Many see erratic behavior and disruption of the world order. Laura Bowman, Trump's supporters in many of the Midwestern states and elsewhere see backbone from this president. Is he simply speaking to his domestic audience? And what kind of effect will these tariffs have domestically on the U.S. economy?
Well, I think very clearly that is his #1 audience, is his voting base in the Rust Belt states in particular. The problem that I worry that he's going to face in the very near future is that many of those voters work for steel consuming sectors. A lot of them are small businesses, and they're facing 30–40% price increases right now for steel and 20% and up for aluminum, and they can't afford it. They can't afford to pay that. They are, as a consequence, facing import competition from manufacturers of the products they make. I mean, there was a story about an aluminum keg manufacturer who is now asking for tariffs on imports of kegs because they can't compete with the higher prices of aluminum.
So is this misleading on the part of the U.S. president to make these small businesses believe that Trump has the answer, that these tariff hikes will bring back these jobs and make U.S. companies competitive?
These are all scare stories. They're not true at all. We have many members in the manufacturing sector. This morning, I asked one, what sort of steel price increases have you seen so far? He wrote back like that, and he said, Jeff, 2%. I think that these
I can
scarce...
send you the others.
They're all scarce stories, but the point is, you're right that there will be certain price increases, and this will affect downstream industries, which is why anyone who supports the view of economic nationalists, and that's not just President Trump, but I note that Senator Schumer, the Democratic minority leader, is a strong supporter of this new set of tariffs on China. We all support them. We all support tariffs on downstream industries when necessary. The voters spoke in November 2016 and said they don't buy the story that international trade, totally free international trade, including with countries that subsidize their exports like China and Germany, is going to help the U.S. worker. And they're absolutely right.
But is this nationalist, anti-foreign agenda going to help them any better?
I don't think that it will. Our studies have found that nearly 5,000 motor vehicle jobs will be lost because of the steel and the aluminum tariffs. Steel and aluminum are major inputs into the production of automobiles. You raise the costs of those inputs, they're going to become less competitive. It's economics.
Laura is one of the preeminent economic modelers here in the United States. She uses a model that has been used since 1992 to forecast the effects of NAFTA. That was the model Bill Clinton used when he said NAFTA would lead to 200,000 additional jobs in the United States. Instead, we lost 1 million jobs. We lost 2.5 million jobs because of trade with China. These models and these forecasts are all biased to produce the results that free traders would like to see.
But the last time trade tariffs was imposed on steel imports in 2002 by George W. Bush, we saw the effect of that. Some 200,000 jobs were lost. The president quickly backtracked. Are we seeing a similar mistake being made again?
There were more jobs in manufacturing after those tariffs than
200,000 jobs were lost.
No, they weren't. 200,000 jobs were forecasted by yourself to be lost.
No.
And manufacturing jobs were not actually lost.
Those were ex post analysis. We looked at the past, how many jobs were affected by higher steel prices caused in part by the tariffs, and the result was nearly 200,000 jobs were lost.
But what about the political fallout from all of this? For the midterms next November, the Republicans wanting to retain control of the House, does it bode well for them?
It is a big question right now. I think that the president's supporters are fiercely loyal to him, and they want to believe that there is happy news at the end of this rainbow that he's building. How long the farmers can hang in there, how long the steel consumers can hang in there, can they hang in there past November? We'll have to wait and see how that goes. It's a big question.
Yeah, and what we're seeing is a lot of these trade allies who are upset, a lot of the trade partners like China who are upset as well, are making it very clear that they want maximum impact from these retaliatory measures. So they will, for example, impose higher tariffs on Harley-Davidsons, which are manufactured in Wisconsin, the home state of the Speaker of the House. I mean, this type of retaliation might hurt Republicans, won't it?
I don't think so. Look, the U.S. is the largest economy in the world, the most powerful. We've suffered from a trade deficit for 42 years. We need to take action to reverse that and to help the standard of living of the average American worker. That's what we're doing. Whatever our allies say, I think they understand fundamentally that if you run a trade deficit of $500 billion on goods and services and $800 billion on goods, you've got to do something about it. And that's what we're trying to do.
You've got to do something about it, but was this the right thing to do?
I, first of all, dispute the notion that the trade deficit is a measure of anything meaningful, but even if you were to suggest that it is, there are much more effective ways to get at the problem. Supposedly the problem is China, and tariffs on imports from the EU is not a way to get at China, or Canada, or Mexico, or any of those countries.
Well, there are multiple problems here, and it's easy for reporters in other countries to say, oh, you're upsetting the apple cart. We like the Americans importing $800 billion of our goods, so we're going to scream and stamp our feet. There were other proposals made in the 2016 election. Trump won the election because he said trade is part of the problem. Actually, the voters were right and the economists were wrong. They've all been wrong together. They've been wrong before.
And you say this is mission accomplished. You've upset the world order. This is good for
This
the
is
US?
opening the door to changing the world economic order and letting America get on the path to prosperity again, which we have not been on since 1973.
Many would call it bullying. Your thoughts?
Well, I would. However they want to receive it. If they feel it is bullying, then it is.
Laura Bowman and Jeff Fakhry, thank you both very much.
Thank you very much.
Well, the impact of President Trump's trade war continues to have wide-reaching effects, disrupting decades of US policy and isolating the United States even further. His high-stakes gamble may be driven by domestic political calculations and a desire to take on China's rise as an economic superpower. But it is undermining America's own hegemony while speeding up China's. A new alliance of economic powers is emerging, and a new partnership is reshaping the global order, while Trump's decision to treat allies like adversaries is creating more cracks in an unraveling Western alliance. Ultimately, Trump's protectionist policies could have the unintended consequences of drawing old rivals closer together. From me, Ghida, Fakhry, and the entire team here in Washington, thanks for watching.